The Hartwell High School auditorium on a Tuesday afternoon was a place of sharp echoes and nervous energy. It was talent show audition day, a ritual that divided the student body into two groups, those who buzzed with performative confidence, and everyone else who watched from the shadows. The heavy velvet curtains smelled of dust and old dreams. Folding chairs were set up in a haphazard half-circle on the stage, facing the three student judges. This was the committee, the gatekeepers of the Spring Fling Spectacular Dot. At the head of the table was the senior quarterback, a guy built like someone who won things. Let's call him Liam. He had that easy smile that wasn't always kind, just practiced. To his right was the head of the drama club, a girl who spoke with precise, projected vowels even when asking for a pencil. To his left was the student council treasurer, who took everything very seriously, tapping notes into a tablet. The acts came and went. A freshman did card tricks and dropped the deck twice. A group of sophomores attempted a boy band medley, their harmonies wobbling like a bike with a loose wheel. There was a poet who whispered verses about existential dread into the microphone, earning polite, confused blinks. Each received a stamped form, "We'll let you know," and a nod toward the exit. Off to the side, nearly blending into the painted scenery flat of a Parisian street, stood a girl. She was a junior, known, if she was known at all, as someone who occupied space quietly. Her name was Alara. She wore clothes that spoke of comfort over style, a soft, oatmeal-colored sweater with cuffs that were starting to fray from being pulled over her hands too often. She watched, not with judgment, but with a kind of distant focus, as if studying a complex diagram. Alara didn't move until the stream of auditions trickled to a stop. The committee was packing up, laughing about one of the acts. "Did you hear him try to hit that high note?" "Sounded like a stepped-on cat," Liam chuckled, shoving a chair aside with his foot. That's when she stepped forward. Her sneakers made no sound on the wooden stage. "Excuse me?" The drama club president looked up, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "Auditions are over. Sign-ups were last week." "I did sign up," Alara said. Her voice was the problem. It was low and soft, the kind swallowed by rooms. In the vast, empty auditorium, it barely traveled past the first row of empty audience seats. "What was that?" Liam asked, not unkindly, but with the loud cheerfulness people use when they think someone is hard of hearing. Alara took a small, steadying breath. She pointed, not at the judges, but past them, to the back of the stage. There, shrouded in a heavy, gray canvas tarp, was a hulking shape. "I'd like to play," she said, a little louder. "The piano, please." A beat of silence hung in the air. Then it wasn't silence anymore. It was the sound of held-back laughter, a snort, a disbelieving cough. The piano under the tarp was a school legend, and not a good one. It was a massive old grand, donated decades ago by some alumni nobody remembered. It was famously, infamously out of tune. The choir teacher called it the Beast. The drama club used it as a prop table, its scarred lid holding coffee cups and script binders. Liam leaned back, a wide grin spreading across his face. It wasn't a mean grin, not exactly. It was the grin of someone presented with a delightful absurdity. "That thing? Seriously? You know the C key sticks, right? And the middle octave sounds like a saloon piano from a bad western." The treasurer frowned, consulting his tablet. "The form says instrumental performance. It doesn't specify the instrument's functionality." Alara just stood there, her hands now tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just waited. The drama club president sighed, a puff of air that meant this is a waste of my time. "Look, it's not about you," she said, in a tone that suggested it absolutely was. "It's about the show's quality. If the instrument is defective, it reflects poorly on the entire production. We have a digital keyboard we use for accompaniment. It's in the band room. It has preset rhythms. But Alara shook her head, just once. A firm, small motion. It has to be that one. Why? Liam asked, genuinely curious now, leaning his elbows on the table. She didn't answer for a long moment. Her eyes drifted back to the tarp-covered mound. It's the only one here, she said finally, which wasn't an answer at all. The three judges exchanged a look. It was a look that passed a silent message. Asterisk fine, let her. What's the harm? It'll be a funny story. The quiet girl and the broken piano. We can cut it later if it's a total disaster. Asterisk, it was dismissal disguised as permission. Okay, Liam said, slapping the table with a false finality. You're on the list. But just so you know, tuning that monster isn't in the budget. You get what you get. He grabbed a stamp, pressed it onto an approval form with more force than necessary, and slid it toward the edge of the table. Spring Fling Spectacular. Welcome aboard. Alara walked forward, took the paper, and looked at the smudged, official-looking stamp. Thank you, she murmured as she walked off the stage. The whispers started before she was even out of earshot. Bless her heart, she's brave. I'll give her that. Maybe she's going to play one of those avant-garde pieces that's just like hitting the lid. I give her 30 seconds before Mr. Hendricks stops her. That thing is a noise violation waiting to happen. Alara heard the sounds, the shapes of the words. They didn't seem to touch her. She walked down the dim hallway, past lockers and faded sports banners, the approval form held loosely in her hand. She didn't go toward the bustling commons or the library. She pushed open the heavy door to the empty auditorium seating area and walked down the center aisle, all the way to the very last row. She sat in the shadows and looked at the stage. From here, the tarp-covered piano looked small and lonely. The stage lights were off now, leaving it in gloomy half-light. For a long time, she just sat there, not smiling, not frowning, just watching. Then, slowly, she pulled her hands from her sweater sleeves. In the darkness, her fingers were pale shapes. She lifted them, resting them on the back of the empty seat in front of her. And very, very softly, her shoulders shifting with a subtle, practiced rhythm, her fingers began to move. They danced across the fake wood of the seat, back-pressing, stretching, flowing in a pattern only she could see and hear. A silent sonata for an audience of dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the exit sign. After a few minutes, the movement stopped. She curled her fingers back into fists, tucking them safely away in the soft, frayed cotton of her sweater. She stood up, turned, and left the auditorium, the silence swallowing her whole once more. The stage waited, a piano slept under its dusty shroud, and no one in the bustling world of Hartwell High had the faintest clue what was coming. The night of the Spring Fling Spectacular arrived with a different kind of energy. The nervous, sunlit quiet of the audition room was gone, replaced by a thick, buzzing excitement that filled the Hartwell High auditorium from floor to ceiling. The air smelled of hairspray, cheap perfume, and the waxy scent of the programs everyone clutched. Backstage was a controlled chaos of whispered reminders, last-minute adjustments, and the rustle of costumes. Alara stood apart from it all, a still island in the moving stream. She hadn't gone for glitz. She wore a simple, dark blue dress, something old and a little out of style, but neat and clean. It was the kind of dress you might wear to a family dinner, not a spotlight. She watched the others, the dancers stretching in sequined outfits, the singers doing vocal warm-ups that sounded like ghostly sirens. She just waited, her hands quiet at her sides. From the crack in the heavy curtain, she could see the audience. It was packed. Students filled the seats, leaning over to talk and laugh. Teachers sat in a reserved section, looking proud and slightly relieved the night had finally come. Parents waved cameras. It was a sea of expectant faces, a living, breathing creature waiting to be fed entertainment. The show began. The MC, a popular senior with a shiny suit and a microphone voice, bounded onto the stage. The crowd whooped for him. The first acts went on, each met with a wave of supportive applause. A magic act saw a dove escape and perch on the lighting rig, which got more laughs than the trick. A girl sang a current pop song with a powerful, polished voice, and the audience swayed along. A hip-hop dance crew brought down the house with their synchronized, thunderous moves. The cheers were so loud the floor vibrated. Got through it all. Ilara watched, her face unreadable. She wasn't nervous in the jittery, pacing way of the others. Her calm was deeper, heavier. It was the quiet of someone preparing to lift a great weight. Backstage, near the water cooler, the student committee huddled. Liam, the quarterback, sipped an energy drink. "Solid show so far," he said to the drama club president. "Even the dove was a hit." "It's running smooth," she agreed, checking her clipboard. "Up next is—" "Oh, the piano thing." Liam followed her gaze to where Ilara stood. He smirked, a familiar, easy expression. "Right, the quiet girl and the beast. This should be short." He nudged the treasurer beside him. "You got the hook ready if it gets painful?" "Just kidding, mostly." The treasurer didn't laugh. "She has her allotted 3 minutes, same as everyone else." The MC bounced off stage, sweating and grinning from the last round of applause. He glanced at his cue card as he passed Ilara. "You're on." "Good luck." He said it automatically, already moving toward his water bottle. The drama club president gave Ilara a small, tight nod. It was a signal. Ilara walked out of the wings and into the full glare of the stage lights. The transition was jarring. One moment she was in the dim, bustling darkness. The next she was alone in a silent, blazing white circle. The applause from the previous act trickled away, replaced by a murmur of curiosity. Who was this? She didn't look like a performer. In her plain dress, under the harsh lights, she looked very young and very small on the huge, empty stage. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing slightly. "And now, for something a little different. Ilara Vance will play a piece on the piano." There was a polite, scattered clap that died almost immediately. People were confused. The piano was still a shapeless lump under its tarp, pushed to the very back of the stage like an afterthought. It looked less like an instrument and more like a piece of forgotten furniture. Ilara didn't walk to center stage. She didn't smile or wave. She simply turned and walked toward the back, her footsteps the only sound in the quieting hall. A few people in the front rows craned their necks. Someone in the middle section whispered, a little too loudly, "Where's she going?" She reached the tarp. For a moment, she just stood before it, looking at the dusty gray fabric. Then, with a calm that seemed to slow down time, she reached out, took a corner of the tarp, and pulled. It slid off with a soft, heavy whoosh, releasing a little cloud of dust that danced in the spotlight. Underneath was the piano. It was big and grand, but its dark wood was scratched and dull. The lid was closed. It sat there, silent and imposing. The audience watched, intrigued, but not yet impressed. This was like watching someone prepare to fix a car, not perform art. Ilara walked to the bench, which was just a plain wooden stool. She pulled it out, sat down, and adjusted its position with a careful, deliberate tug. It screeched faintly on the floor. The sound was embarrassingly loud in the quiet. From the wings, Liam shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. He crossed his arms, settling in for what he assumed would be an awkward, forgettable 3 minutes. On stage, Ilara opened the fallboard, revealing the keys. They were yellowed with age, a stark ivory in the bright light. She just looked at them for what felt like an age. The auditorium was so quiet. Now you could hear the hum of the lights, the distant cough from the back row. She placed her hands in her lap and slowly raised them. She held them above the keys, her fingers curved gently, suspended. In the front row, a teacher leaned forward, squinting. There was something in the way her hands hovered. It wasn't hesitant. It was poised. It was the moment before a dive into deep water, Dot, then. She let them fall, Dot. It wasn't a timid press. It wasn't a single searching note. It was a chord. A deep, complex, roaring wave of sound that erupted from the old piano and flooded the auditorium. The sound was not what anyone expected. It wasn't tinny or out of tune in a funny way. It was rich and dark and powerful, with a slight, gritty edge that gave it a real, lived-in weight. It wasn't the sound of a broken saloon piano. It was the sound of a storm waking up. Every single person in the audience flinched, as if startled by a thunderclap. The whisperers fell silent mid-sentence. The smilers froze. Ilara's body, which had been so still, came alive. Her back straightened, her shoulders dropped, and her entire being seemed to flow into the instrument. Her hands, those quiet hands that had been tucked in sweater sleeves, were now a blur of impossible motion. They flew across the keys with a fierce, graceful certainty, left hand weaving thunderous, rolling bass notes that you felt in your chest, right hand spinning melodies that were by turns, heartbreakingly tender and violently passionate. The music wasn't just notes being played correctly. It was a story. It was anger and sadness and a huge, aching longing, all pouring out of her and into the old piano, which answered her back with a voice no one knew it had. It sang for her. It growled for her. It wept for her, Dot, in the wings. Liam's crossed arms dropped to his sides. His mouth, which had been ready to curve into a pitying smile, was just open. The drama club president's clipboard hung limp at her side, forgotten. The treasurer simply stared, his analytical mind unable to process the data. His eyes and ears were sending him Dot in the audience. All the fidgeting stopped. Phones were lowered. People weren't just listening. They were being pulled into the sound. A girl who had been texting let her phone slide into her lap, her eyes wide. A teacher who taught chemistry, a man who thought in formulas, felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. In the very back, where the latecomers stood, a hush had fallen so complete it was its own kind of sound. Ilara was gone. The quiet girl was gone. In her place was a force of nature, a conduit for something ancient and bigger than the school, the town, anything in the room. The stage lights weren't exposing her anymore. They were illuminating her. The piano, a sad, mocked beast, was finally roaring, and its voice was glorious. And for the first time that night, the packed auditorium was utterly, completely, and profoundly still. The music didn't just fill the room. It changed the air. That first, shocking chord had been a key turning in a lock, and now the door was blown wide open. What poured out was a landscape of sound, vast and emotional, and Ilara was its only guide. Her hands were a mesmerizing blur. People found they couldn't look away from them. One moment they were dancing lightly, fingers barely brushing the yellowed keys, to pull out a thread of melody so sweet and lonely it made your heart ache. The next they became powerful, striking hammers, driving down into the bass with a force that made the old piano's frame shudder and sent a physical vibration through the floorboards. You could see the effort in her arms, the shift of her shoulders. But there was no struggle in it. It was pure, controlled power. The old piano? The beast was singing a song it had kept hidden for decades. The sticking C key? She used it, making its slight lag a dramatic, punctuating beat. The supposedly sour notes in the middle? She wove them into the music so they sounded intentional, like a bluesy cry of pain. She wasn't playing a broken instrument. She was having a conversation with its history, with its scars and its age. And together, they were making something completely new and utterly alive. The audience was trapped in the best way. The initial shock had melted into a deep, rapt stillness. The guy who had been ready to laugh, the one sitting next to his friends, slowly closed his mouth. His smirk had vanished, leaving behind a blank canvas of awe. He wasn't thinking about his friends or the joke they'd shared earlier. He was just listening. A girl in the third row, who had been filming the dance crew on her phone, had let her hand drop to her lap. The screen had gone dark. She wasn't thinking about social media or angles. She was just watching, her eyes shiny. Backstage, the world had stopped. The next act, a duo with acoustic guitars, stood frozen by the curtain, their instruments hanging forgotten at their sides. They exchanged a look that said, "What are we supposed to do after that?" The dance crew, still sweating from their triumph, stood in a silent huddle, their earlier cockiness replaced by a humbled respect. They understood physical expression, and what they were seeing was a master class. Liam, the quarterback, had taken an unconscious step forward, out of the shadows and into the edge of the light spilling from the stage. His arms were no longer crossed. His hands hung loosely at his sides. The confident, knowing expression he'd worn all night was gone. In its place was something raw and unguarded, simple, utter disbelief. This wasn't in the playbook. This wasn't something you could strategize against. It was like watching someone quietly lift a car. It broke the rules of the world as he knew it. He watched the girl on the stage, the one he'd called Quiet Girl, and he couldn't connect the person he saw now with the person he'd dismissed. They were two different species. On stage, Alara was somewhere else. The bright lights, the hundreds of eyes, they had all dissolved. There was only the geography of the keyboard under her fingers and the map of the music in her mind. She wasn't performing for them. She was following a path laid down a long time ago, a path made of memory and muscle. The piece swelled, climbing higher and higher, a tremendous wave building and building. Her body leaned into it, every part of her focused on the summit. The music became almost unbearable in its intensity, a beautiful, screaming tension. And then, with a final, cascading run down the keys, it broke. The final notes were not loud. They were deep, resonant chords that rang out and then began to fade, slowly, like a great bell sounding in a distant valley. She held the last one, her left hand pressed down, letting the sound vibrate and decay into a whisper. And then, silence. Her hands lifted from the keys and settled softly in her lap. She was still, her head bowed slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with a single deep breath. The transition was jarring. The force of nature was gone, and the girl in the simple blue dress was back. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. It was a thick, living silence, full of the echo of what had just happened. It wasn't the silence of boredom or disinterest. It was the silence of people who have had the breath knocked out of them. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. No one clapped. No one coughed. They were all suspended in the afterglow of the sound, trying to return to their bodies, to the hard seats, to the reality of a high school auditorium. In the front row, the chemistry teacher was the first to move. He didn't mean to. A single tear had escaped, tracing a clean line through the slight stubble on his cheek. He quickly brushed it away, embarrassed, but when he looked around, he saw he wasn't alone. The woman next to him, a parent he didn't know, was dabbing her eyes with a program. Then, like a dam breaking, the sound came. It started with one person, maybe that same teacher, standing up. The scrape of the chair was loud in the quiet. Then another person near him rose. And then another. It wasn't a slow, polite standing ovation. It was a wave, a sudden surge, as the entire audience seemed to understand at once that sitting was no longer an option. They erupted. The applause was thunderous. It was louder than for the dance crew, louder than anything that night. It was mixed with shouts and whistles, a raw, emotional noise of pure appreciation. Kids were stomping their feet on the wooden floor, creating a rhythmic boom that shook the room. The sound was physical, a wall of gratitude hitting the stage. Alara, still sitting at the piano, seemed to surface slowly from a deep dive. The noise seemed to reach her from far away. She blinked, turning her head slightly to look out at the sea of standing, clapping, cheering people. There was no smile of triumph on her face. Her expression was one of profound tiredness and a kind of gentle surprise, as if she'd just woken from a vivid dream and found herself here. She pushed the bench back, the screech now completely inaudible under the roar. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the center of the stage, the spot she had avoided before. She gave one small, respectful bow from the waist, her hands clasped in front of her. It was a formal, almost old-fashioned gesture. It wasn't the bow of a star seeking more love. It was the bow of an artist acknowledging a shared moment. Then she turned and walked off stage, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The applause didn't fade as she left. It intensified, chasing her into the wings. The MC, looking utterly stunned, had to walk back on stage to try and get people to quiet down so the show could continue. He held up his hands, grinning a huge, incredulous grin. "Wow, just wow," he said into the mic, which was almost pointless over the noise. Backstage, Alara walked through a gauntlet of stairs. The other performers didn't crowd her. They just made a path, looking at her as if she were a comet that had just streaked through their locker room. Some offered shaky smiles or thumbs up. She nodded briefly in return, her face still that mask of quiet exhaustion. She didn't stop for congratulations. She walked past the wide-eyed committee, past Liam, who opened his mouth as if to say something, but found no words. She walked straight to the dim, cluttered corner where the water cooler was, poured a small paper cup full, and drank it slowly, her back to the noise and the chaos. She had asked to play the piano. Everyone had mocked her. So she did. And in doing so, she hadn't just played a piece of music. She had redrawn the entire map of the evening, and maybe, for everyone watching, the map of what they thought was possible. The quiet in the room after she finished was the loudest sound many of them had ever heard, and the roar that followed was the sound of an entire school changing its mind. The rest of the Spring Fling Spectacular felt like trying to run a race after a meteor had just landed on the track. The acts that followed Ilara were good, talented even, but they performed into a room that was still ringing. The applause they got was polite, warm, but it came from a different place. It was appreciation, not awe. People's minds were stuck on the piano, on the girl, on the sound that had seemed to physically change the temperature of the air. Backstage was where the real shockwave hit. The orderly chaos was gone, replaced by a buzzing, electric confusion. Everyone was talking, but in hushed, urgent tones, as if they'd witnessed something sacred and also a little frightening. Did you know she could do that? What even was that piece? My hands were shaking. The duo with guitars went on and played their song about summer love, but their hearts weren't in it anymore. They felt like they were singing a nursery. Alara didn't stay in the thick of it. After her slow drink of water, she just drifted. She found an old, paint-splattered stool tucked behind a rolled-up backdrop and sat there, half hidden in the shadows. She wasn't hiding, not exactly. She just seemed to need the quiet. The performance had taken something out of her, a kind of energy that left her feeling hollowed out and very tired. The noise and the excited whispers seemed to bounce off the invisible bubble she had put around herself. People glanced at her, but nobody approached. There was an unspoken barrier there. It was like seeing a teacher outside of school. You weren't sure how to act. The girl who had been just another quiet face in the hallway was now someone completely other. Liam, the quarterback, stood with his friends near the light board. Their usual loud joking was absent. He kept looking over at the corner where Alara sat. His face was a puzzle of conflicting emotions. There was embarrassment, a hot, prickly feeling remembering his smirk, his comment about the stepped-on cat, high note. But stronger than that was a pure, simple shock. He'd spent years in a world where things made sense. Talent was loud and obvious. Confidence was everything. This had broken all of that. "You okay, man?" one of his friends asked, nudging him. Liam just shook his head slowly. Did that really just happen? His friend, the drummer in the jazz band who knew a little about music, whistled low. That wasn't just playing, man. That was, I don't even have a word for it. That was next level. My band teacher is going to lose his mind. When the final curtain call came, all the performers had to line up on stage. Alara was gently pushed toward the center by the drama club president, whose earlier impatience was now a flustered respect. You should be in the middle. As they walked out for the group bow, the spotlight, following the MC's cue, landed right on Alara. The applause, which had been steady, erupted all over again. It was for everyone, but it was clear who they were really cheering for. Kids in the audience were pointing, their faces lit up. Alara didn't blush or beam. She offered that same small, formal bow from before, her expression one of quiet endurance more than joy. Then she quickly stepped back, trying to blend into the line of other performers. The second the curtain closed for the last time, the bubble popped. She was swarmed. A freshman from the stage crew thrust a program and a pen at her. "Can you sign this, please?" The hip-hop dance crew leader gave her a solid, respectful fist bump. Sis, that was fire. For real. The chemistry teacher from the front row had made his way backstage. Alara, that was extraordinary. Rachmaninoff, Second Concerto? The audacity to tackle that on this old thing. Have you studied privately for long? Alara handled it all with a distant politeness. She signed the program with a simple E. She nodded at the compliments, murmuring a quiet thank you that was almost lost in the din. To the teacher, she just said, "A while ago," and looked at the floor. The most awkward moment came when Liam finally broke away from his group and approached. He looked like he was walking toward a principal, not a fellow student. He stopped in front of her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey," he said. His voice, usually so sure, was unsure. Alara looked up at him. She didn't say anything, just waited, that was. "I've never heard anything like that," he said, stumbling over the words. "I mean, at school. Ever. I didn't know." It wasn't an apology. It was too clumsy for that. But it was an acknowledgement, a tearing down of the easy judgment he'd built. He was trying to see her, the real her, for the first time. Alara studied his face for a second. She saw the embarrassment, the genuine wonder. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay," she said softly. And in a way, it was. His mockery hadn't mattered. It had been like a mosquito buzzing next to a symphony. It was so small, it was almost funny now. She finally excused herself, saying she needed to get her things. The crowd parted for her again. She went to the dark corner behind the backdrop where she'd left a small, worn-out backpack. As she swung it over her shoulder, she heard two teachers talking in low voices nearby. A prodigy, clearly. I heard a rumor years ago about a middle schooler winning a major competition, but the family was very private, and the mother passed. You don't think? It would fit. The technique, the emotion. That's not just lessons. That's a lifetime. Ilara's steps slowed for just a moment. She didn't turn. She just closed her eyes, took a deep breath that hitched slightly in her chest, and then walked on, heading for the side door that led out to the parking lot. That the cool night air hit her face like a blessing. It was quiet outside. The sounds of the cheering crowd were muffled, just a dull roar through the brick walls. She could see parents waiting in their cars, headlights cutting through the dark. She didn't head toward them. She walked around the side of the building, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. She found the old wooden bench near the dumpsters, the one the smokers used sometimes. She sat down, dropped her backpack at her feet, and finally let out a long, shuddering breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours. Alone in the dark, the mask completely fell away. Her shoulders slumped. She looked up at the few stars visible through the haze of town lights. Her eyes were dry, but her face was etched with a deep, weary sadness that had nothing to do with the performance. The triumph inside was a distant thing, a small, bright coin at the bottom of a very deep, cold well. She had done it. She had played the piano, and for 3 minutes she hadn't been a girl grieving in a quiet house. She had been music itself. But now she was just Ilara again, sitting on a cold bench. And the person she most wanted to tell about her night was the one person she could never tell. She pulled her sweater sleeves over her hands. The familiar frayed cuffs a small comfort. From inside the building, she heard one last, final burst of applause. The show was truly over. She stood up, shouldered her backpack, and started the long walk home, the echo of the music she'd made still ringing silently in her bones, a companion in the quiet dark. The morning after the talent show, Hartwell High was a different school. It was like a stone had been dropped into the still pond of routine, and the ripples were everywhere. In the hallways, between classes, the buzz wasn't about weekend plans or sports. It was about the piano. It was about her. Ilara walked through it all like a ghost. The whispers followed her, but they were different whispers now. They weren't dismissive or mocking. They were hushed, reverent. That's her. No way, she looks so normal. I heard she's like a genius. People didn't try to talk to her much. They just stared, as if she might suddenly start emitting musical notes. She went to her locker. Taped to it was a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the school's logo with a handwritten note. The music department would be honored if you would consider joining the honors orchestra or jazz ensemble. No audition required. Please see Mr. Darien. She carefully took it down, folded it, and put it in her backpack. She didn't look around to see who might be watching Dot in first period. Her English teacher, a woman who usually dove straight into Shakespeare, paused at the start of class. She smiled at Ilara. Before we begin, I think we should acknowledge a rather stunning artistic achievement from one of our own last night. Ilara, that was a gift to everyone in that room. Thank you. The class broke into spontaneous, brief applause. Ilara sank lower in her chair, her cheeks warming, managing a tight smile. It felt strange, like wearing a coat that was too big. The attention was a kind of weather she had to walk through. It was constant, but light. A nod from a teacher in the hall. A thumbs up from a senior she'd never spoken to. The student council treasurer stopped her to say, formally, data-wise, your segment received the highest approval rating in the post-show survey. By a significant margin. He said it like he was presenting a scientific finding. Liam, a quarterback, saw her near the water fountain. He didn't smirk. He didn't make a joke. He just met her eyes and gave a single, slow nod. It was a peace treaty, offered and accepted without a word. Then he kept walking with his friends. But the real change, the one that mattered to Elara, happened in the quiet spaces the next afternoon. When the final bell rang, she didn't go straight home. She didn't go to the library. She walked, almost without thinking, back to the auditorium. It was empty, dark, and cool. The chairs were all neatly lined up. The stage was bare, the piano once again under its gray tarp. She stood in the aisle for a long minute. Then she walked down, climbed the steps to the stage, and went to the piano. She pulled off the tarp, letting it pool on the floor. She sat on the bench, the same screech sound echoing in the huge, silent room. This time, there was no audience. No blinding lights. No expectation. It was just her and the beast. She didn't play Rachmaninoff. She didn't play anything loud or stormy. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play something slow and simple and old. A piece by Bach. It was like a conversation, clean and mathematical and beautiful in its logic. The notes rang out, pure and clear in the emptiness. She played it through once, then again, softer, letting her mind wander. As she played, the side door of the auditorium creaked open. A small figure slipped in, a freshman girl, tiny and nervous-looking, clutching a violin case to her chest like a shield. She froze when she saw Elara, looking like she was about to turn and run. Elara's hand slowed, then stopped. The last note hung in the air. She turned and looked at the girl, but didn't say anything. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered, her voice echoing. I practice in here sometimes. It's quiet. I can come back." Elara shook her head. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was still soft, but it didn't get lost here. "You can stay." The girl hesitated, then shuffled to a seat in the third row, not taking her violin out. She just sat, listening. Elara turned back to the piano. She started playing again, something different now. A gentle, rippling melody. It wasn't a famous piece. It sounded like something being made up on the spot, a meandering musical thought. After a minute, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "What's your name?" "Amy," the girl said. "Do you want to play?" Elara asked. Amy's eyes went wide. "With you? I'm not very good. I just started this year." "Neither was I once," Elara said. It wasn't quite true, but it was kind. "Play something, you know. I'll follow you." Slowly, nervously, Amy took out her violin, tuned it with fumbling fingers, and lifted it to her chin. She played a simple scale, then a beginner's etude, her bow shaking a little. The sound was thin and scratchy in the big room. Elara listened for a moment, her head tilted. Then, softly, she began to play chords underneath it. Not fancy chords, just simple, solid harmonies that cradled the shaky violin tune, supporting it, making it sound fuller and sweeter than it was. Amy's playing grew a little more confident. She didn't sound like a master. She sounded like a kid learning, but now she didn't sound alone. They played like that for maybe 10 minutes. When Amy finished her piece, a huge, relieved smile broke out on her face. "That sounded better," she said. Elara gave a small, real smile back. "It did." From then on, it became a pattern. Elara would come to the auditorium after school. Sometimes she played the fierce, difficult music from the talent show. More often, she played quiet things, working through old pieces she half remembered, letting her fingers relearn their language. And she wasn't always alone. The jazz band drummer started showing up, asking timid questions about chord structures. The girl from the talent show who sang the pop song came once, and they tried to figure out a piano accompaniment for one of her songs. Even the drama club president came in and just sat, doing homework while Elara played, saying it was better than study hall. Elara didn't become suddenly popular. She didn't join any clubs. She didn't perform again. The school's excitement eventually settled into a new, quiet understanding. She was the piano girl, and that was enough. One rainy Thursday, she was playing a melancholy, bluesy piece when she felt a presence. She looked up. The chemistry teacher, Mr. Darien, was standing in the aisle. He had a kind face and was holding 2 paper coffee cups. He walked up and offered her one. "I come in here to grade sometimes," he said, sitting in the front row. "Don't let me interrupt." She took the coffee. "Thank you." He sipped his, looking at the piano. "I knew your mother, you know. Not well. But I heard her play once, at a benefit concert in the city. She was extraordinary." Elara's hands went still on the keys. She didn't look at him. She just nodded, her throat tight. "It's a heavy thing, a gift like that," he said gently, not pushing. "It can feel like an inheritance. Sometimes an inheritance is a treasure. Sometimes it's a weight. Most of the time, it's both." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding she join his orchestra. He was just seeing her, seeing the whole story. It was her piano at home, Elara said quietly, the first time she'd volunteered anything about it to anyone at the school. After she was gone, I couldn't. The silence in it was too loud. This one, she gestured to the scratched school piano. It was just a piano. It was just wood and wire. It was easier. Mr. Darien nodded. "I'm glad you found it." He stood up, gathering his things. "The offer for the orchestra stands, but so does the offer for this." He waved a hand around the empty auditorium. "This is good too." He left her alone with the coffee and the rain tapping on the high windows. Elara finished the coffee, the warmth spreading through her. She put the cup down and turned back to the piano. She didn't play a masterpiece. She played a simple, hopeful little tune, something that felt like the sun trying to break through the clouds. It wasn't for an audience, or for her mother, or to prove a point. It was just for the sake of the sound, and for the girl on the bench, who was finally starting to remember that music could be a friend, and not just a ghost.